I want to bring in now my colleague and friend, Joe Scarborough. Of course, he is the host of MSNBC's Morning Joe and author of the new book and a perfect holiday gift, Saving Freedom, Truman, the Cold War, and the Fight for Western Civilization. Joe, it is so good to see you on this Sunday afternoon. I'm used to seeing you when I've only gotten about 3 or 4 hours of sleep, so it feels like old times, but not.
Yeah. Exactly. By the way, congratulations on actually having a show where you don't have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning.
Thank you, Joe. I got to say, as I was researching you coming on the show today to learn more about President Truman, I got to say there's 2 things I learned. First, there's so much I didn't know. And secondly, I should have listened more in history class back in elementary school because there's certainly a lot that I missed. But thank you for writing your book, so now I can catch up. So talk me through this. I actually want to start off where I left with John Podesta, and that is a situation in which Joe Biden is entering on January 20th, where he could have a Republican Senate with Mitch McConnell as the leader. Do you think Joe Biden, especially considering the book that you just completed and is out now, has the ability to bridge the gap with someone like Mitch McConnell to actually get things done in Washington, considering where we are with the government right now?
I do, really, more so than any president since Bill Clinton, who, as governor in Arkansas for 12 years, had to deal with a very conservative state legislature, and he knew that he had to make deals. And so when we got elected, my freshman class in 1994, we had one goal in mind, and that was to stop Bill Clinton in his tracks. Well, Bill Clinton knew how to outmaneuver us. He knew how to give us deals that we couldn't say no to. And the thing that I was always impressed with Bill Clinton about is you could impeach him on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday he'd call you up and say, hey, you want to go golfing? Because he always knew there was another deal to make. There was another issue that he needed to get through Congress. And so he knew he had the right pedigree for Congress. He knew how to deal with them. And that's the same thing with Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden will be the first president this century that really understands not only the United States Senate in Washington, D.C., but really understands the give and take of the legislative process. And so, no, it's not going to be easy dealing with Mitch McConnell. But, it's never easy dealing with somebody on the other side. And I heard your discussion before also about how hard it'll be with a divided nation as Joe Biden is sworn in. Well, George W. Bush was sworn in early 2001 after the recount in 2000, after the Supreme Court decision. He ended up working with Teddy Kennedy on education reform, working with other Democrats on several reform measures. Even before 9/11, he had approval ratings in the mid to high 50s. Of course, he ended up having the highest approval ratings by the end of the year of any president in U.S. history, just 1 year after the 2000 recount. So it is possible. It's just going to require that people meet in the middle, and that's not going to make politicians on the far right or the far left happy, but that is what Americans, that's a message Americans sent with their vote this year. They want Republicans and Democrats to work together.
But don't you think Washington is so incredibly different than it was back in 2000? I mean, we're now in a post-Trump era. There's post-Trump and pre-Trump. I mean, what Washington was back in 2015 versus what Washington is now is completely and utterly different. And many Republicans, your former colleagues, have shown their true colors, especially in the last, 30 days or so since November 3rd.
Yeah, well, I've been extraordinarily disappointed with the Republicans. But again, I take you back to when I was in Congress. We didn't like Bill Clinton. We impeached him. Bill Clinton had very little use for us. There was a huge ideological divide. And there was, I think more importantly, there was a huge cultural divide. And yet, together, we figured out how to work together and balance a budget for the first time in a generation. We balanced it 4 years in a row for the first time since the 1920s. We passed welfare reform, and we passed legislation that was possible. Again, politics is an art of the possible. If the American people put a moderate Democrat in charge of the White House, and give Republicans wins in the state legislature or in the House of Representatives and also in the United States Senate, they're obviously sending a message and it's up to the politicians in Washington to figure that out. I think it's going to be difficult, but you know what? Politics can be difficult, but at the same time, I think they can get it done.
So I want to talk about your book, and one of the reasons why is the similarities between Harry Truman and Joe Biden are just striking, not only in the men that they are and were, but the time in which they are at, the time in which Joe Biden is at and the time in which Harry Truman was at when he became president. And there was actually something really interesting I read from one of Harry Truman's grandchildren, an article in the Seattle Times from November 22nd. And in it, they write this: Grandpa wanted Ike to be able to hit the ground running without suffering a fate similar to his own, because Franklin Roosevelt compartmentalized when he died on April 12, 1945. Grandpa ascended to the presidency knowing virtually nothing about how the White House had been running things. Talking about a really difficult transition for Harry Truman, pretty similar, obviously a different situation now for Joe Biden, but pretty similar when it comes to talk about difficult transitions.
I would say the only worse transition in modern American history, we'll even say since World War II, the only worse transition than this one would be the one between FDR and Truman, because Roosevelt knew he was going to die. In fact, he told Truman, he said, hey, don't take planes because one of us needs to stay alive through this campaign. Truman only met with FDR twice after they got into the White House. He knew that FDR was going to die. A friend had said, you know, you're going to be president soon. And he said, I'm afraid I am, and it scares the hell out of me. And despite Roosevelt knowing that he was a dying man, he never talked to Truman about the Manhattan Project. He never talked to him about the challenges of ending World War II in Europe or in Japan. And so when Truman became president of the United States, he was blindsided. It wasn't until after his first cabinet meeting as president that he heard about the atomic bomb, that we were developing the atomic bomb. So he was kept in the dark more than any vice president, more than any incoming president. And yet he was surrounded by smart people, by the best and the brightest, as Walter Isaacson and Evan Thomas say, the wise men of foreign policy at the time. And it made all the difference in the world. I think Joe Biden surrounding himself with some pretty smart men and women as well. And so, again, I hate to be overly optimistic, but I'm very positive. I think Joe Biden can hit the ground running.
Well, and then talk about economic peril, right? Harry Truman facing economic peril both here and in Europe. You're talking about post-World War II. I mean, we are in a war essentially now with this pandemic, 9 months in, 250,000 people dead, millions of people getting this coronavirus every single week. I mean, it is astounding. And then isolationism that we faced back then after World War II, and the isolationism that we're facing here in this country now. It is so incredible, the parallels that these two men face and faced.
There were so many parallels, and as tough as things may be for Joe Biden right now, you go back to 1947 when Harry Truman knew that he had to actually save Western civilization from Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. At the time, you had Greece, you had Turkey, you had Iran under Soviet threat. And so he had to move quickly, but he had to move with the Republican Congress that was filled with isolationists. But he worked. Since he'd been in the United States Senate, just like Joe Biden, he had personal relationships. He worked very closely with Arthur Vandenberg, once an avowed isolationist. He kept him engaged every step of the way. And it really did. Those relationships ended up making a huge difference. And the Republican Party, which had been isolationist and had stopped Woodrow Wilson from getting into the League of Nations after the First World War, which, of course, led to the rise of Adolf Hitler and led to the Second World War. Harry Truman was able to work with these isolationist Republicans and convince them one by one that this was the right move to make, that they not only had to stop being isolationist on the foreign stage, but they also had to pass the Marshall Plan. There was a refugee crisis in Europe, one of the greatest refugee crises ever. And it required the United States and a Republican Congress that didn't want to spend money at home, let alone abroad, to pass this huge foreign policy, this huge foreign aid package. And in doing that, what did he do? He reached out to Herbert Hoover, a disgraced former Republican president, to actually run that program. And that bought a lot of Republican support by doing it. He had the ability to build a bipartisan consensus, and in the end, that bipartisan consensus made all the difference in the world. It wasn't easy in 1947. It won't be easy in 2001, but it is possible. Politics remains the art of the possible.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.